Do you have your ball of thread? Will you find the exit in time? Or will the Minotaur get you? Don't worry, you're safe. The Minotaur is gone. Theseus did have Ariadne's thread, and he slayed the monster. After all, he had experience with monsters.
This is the story I want to tell you. The story of a hero so great that his fame even stole a temple. This is the story of Theseus. For centuries, this magnificent temple behind me has been associated with Theseus. And why not? I mean, he is, yes, the slayer of the bull of Crete, of the Minotaur, but he is also the prince and later the king of the city. So why shouldn't he have a temple? And why not in the most important square of the city of Athens, the Agora? It all made sense, actually, until one day it archaeologically didn't.
This changes everything.
But before we delve into whose temple it really is, let's start with Theseus' own history. Like most stories, this one doesn't start with Theseus, but with Theseus' father, Aegeus, king of Athens. Aegeus had the single greatest problem a king could have. He had no male heir. According to Pausanias, Aegeus had deemed his own childlessness and the misfortune of his sisters were due to the wrath of the heavenly goddess. What had Aegeus done to anger Aphrodite? Nobody knows, not even him actually. But the king thought that introducing the cult of Aphrodite Urania in Athens would solve his problem. Spoiler alert, it didn't. And so, out of options, he set off for Delphi to ask Apollo and his prophetess why he still didn't have a son. The piteous Apollo's priestess gave him a somewhat cryptic response.
Do not open the foot of the wineskin until you return home.
If you want to try out yourself if you understand or not the prophecy of the Pythia, stop the video here for a moment because I will give you the answer next. Did you figure it out? Well, Aegeus certainly didn't. So on his way back from Delphi to Athens, he decided to stop in Troezen to ask for the help of the wise king of Troezen, Theseus. Theseus immediately realized what the Pythia had meant with her prophecy, but feigned ignorance and turned the situation to his advantage. The prophecy's warning was clear. Aegeus was not to get drunk before reaching Athens. But Theseus, wanting his own bloodline on the Athenian throne, had other plans. He arranged a banquet in Aegeus' honor, got the king drunk, and ensured he ended the night with his daughter, Aethra. Athena, patron goddess of Athens, meddled in the union. To ensure a suitable ruler for her city, she instructed Aethra to seek out Poseidon as well, so that the resulting child would also have the power of the god of the sea. Now, my biology is a little bit rusty, but I'm pretty sure that inherited traits don't work this way. In the end, Aegeus departed for Athens, leaving Aethra in Troezen, possibly pregnant from their encounter. He also left his sword and armor hidden under a massive rock, giving Aethra a clear command. If she bore a child who grew strong enough to lift the stone and retrieve the items, she must send them to Athens to reclaim their birthright. Of course, only if they were male. 9 months later, a healthy baby boy was born by the name of Theseus. For 16 years, Aethra kept Theseus with her at the court of Troezen. And then, when he finally was strong enough to lift the rock and get to the armor and sword, she told him the entire story and told him to go to Athens and see Aegeus to reclaim his birthright. There were two possible routes that Theseus could have taken from Troezen to Athens. One was the sea route, safer and faster. One was the land route, far slower and riddled with monsters. Of course, being young and thinking the most of himself, Theseus took the land route, obviously.
Theseus was determined to inscribe his name in legend, emulating his childhood hero, Hercules. He had never forgotten the hero's visit, an encounter that had marked him for greatness. The Athenian prince-to-be would use this journey to prove his greatness, performing his own labors, just as Hercules had done. One by one, he dismantled the road's terrors. Bandits, giant pigs, innkeepers, and even kings. All of them were forced to bow in front of Theseus' greatness. By the time he arrived in Athens, he had already gained quite some renown, at least in the countryside. This reputation, however, clearly hadn't reached everyone, because according to Pausanias, when Theseus came to the city, he was a stranger as yet to everyone. He wore a tunic that reached to his feet and had his hair neatly plaited. The men building the roof of a temple asked him mockingly why a marriageable virgin was wandering about by herself.
Because gods forbid that a man cares about his appearance.
The only answer Theseus made was to loose, it is said, the oxen from the cart hard by and to throw them higher than the roof of the temple they were building.
In recognition of all the deeds he's already done along the way, Theseus is immediately taken to Aegeus, who apparently had grown old and blind because he didn't recognize the armor and sword that Theseus so obviously displayed.
Although Aegeus didn't recognize his son, his wife Medea knew Theseus instantly. She saw him as a dire threat, as her own son Medus was the heir to the Athenian throne. Determined to eliminate this rival, Medea plotted to send Theseus on deadly missions.
Theseus had already proven himself a capable enough hero, so Medea had no difficulty in convincing Aegeus to send Theseus here to Marathon, because there was one last beast that needed slain, the Marathonian bull.
Are we finally at the Minotaur?
Well, no, but this bull was its father. Okay, quick side story in 15 seconds.
It was the bull Minos refused to sacrifice to Poseidon, the one his wife fell in love and sired little Asterion with, better known as the Minotaur. Hercules captured it for labor number 7, but then released it because people were terrified of it. It ended up in Marathon, terrorizing the countryside.
That's done. Let's move on with the main story. A little bit of wrestling, a good application of force, and after a bit of a scuffle, the Marathonian bull was tamed.
Much to Medea's consternation, Theseus returned from Marathon victorious. At the celebratory banquet, she took matters into her own hands, lacing a chalice with poison. As Theseus reached for the poisoned cup, Aegeus finally noticed the sword and armor. He instantly recognized the tokens he had left in Troezen. Realizing it was his son, he knocked the cup from Theseus' hand, banished Medea, and finally welcomed his heir with open arms.
Now Theseus was the official and recognized the Prince of Athens, and he immediately set out to solve yet another problem for its beloved city.
This time, the problem was political. Years before, the Athenians had murdered the Cretan prince Androgeus, After he dominated the Panathenaic Games, his father, King Minos of Crete, had never forgiven the insult, and his vengeance was still crippling the city.
In reparation for the death of his firstborn,
Minos asked for 7 female and 7 male youths.
every 9 years.
Their grim fate? They were shipped to Crete, marched into the unescapable labyrinth, and sacrificed, one by one, to the monster within, the Minotaur.
When Theseus had arrived in Athens, it was time to send those sacrifices.
As the newly recognized son of the king, Theseus refused to stand by. He boldly volunteered to be one of the tributes, vowing to enter the labyrinth, kill the beast, and end Athens' nightmare forever.
Once there, he managed to seduce Ariadne, princess of Crete, half-sister of the Minotaur, who gave him a ball of yarn to navigate the labyrinth and then escaped with him once Theseus had finally managed to slay the beast. Unfortunately for her, Theseus repaid this loyalty and this abnegation by abandoning Ariadne on the first available island.
You are truly leaving me then?
But Ariadne's fate was not one of despair. Dionysus, god of wine, found her and fell deeply in love with her. He granted her immortality and set her bridal crown among the stars as an eternal testament to their union. He can still see it in the night, the constellation Corona Borealis.
After having abandoned Ariadne to a greater, grander destiny than whatever he could have offered her, Theseus made for Athens.
But in his haste, or perhaps his grief, he forgot the one promise he had made to his father: to swap the ship's black sails for white ones.
If white sails were on the horizon, then Aegeus would know that Theseus had been successful. Black sails meant that Theseus was gone. But Theseus did not change the sails. He forgot to switch them from black to white. So when Aegeus looked onto the horizon, he only saw black, and he killed himself in the sea that from then on took his own name. And thus the prophecy of the Pythia was finally complete. Because what the Pythia told Aegeus that day so many years before had been,
Do not open the foot of the wineskin until you return home, lest you die of grief.
Whoa, hold on. Is the story really finished like this? Well, not quite. His ascension might have been the result of a tragedy, but now Theseus was king of Athens. As he exchanged the sword for the scepter and the monster's lair for the council room, Theseus embraced this new role and set about introducing revolutionary policies. His heroic deeds are what we remember today, but in his day, he was mostly revered for the politics that created a unified Athens.
but despite his new role, Theseus was still an adventurer at heart. He missed the action. So when he decided it was time to marry, he wouldn't just settle for any bride. And who better than the fairest of them all? Helen of Sparta, later known as Helen of Troy.
That's who he vowed to claim.
He recruited his best friend Pirithous, who was also looking for a wife.
They made a pact. They would get wives for both of them. First they went to Sparta, snatched the then 12-year-old Helen from her home and brought her to Athens. With Helen secured, it was Pirithous' turn to choose. And his choice was insane.
Because his friend had said that if he had to marry somebody, only the queen of the Underworld would do. Theseus thought the entire idea was madness, but he was bound by his oath.
The two heroes descended together into the Underworld. In an act of pure arrogance, Pirithous didn't bother sneaking in. He walked straight up to Hades and demanded his wife.
Give me your wife! Sit, gentlemen.
The second they sat down in the chairs that Hades offered, their fate was sealed.
The chairs sprang to life as serpents coiled around their legs and bodies, binding them permanently to the rock. Theseus managed to get out years after the fact only because Heracles had come down to the Underworld to free him. And when he got back to Athens, he discovered that the city had moved on without him. He was now obsolete. And when the citizens of Athens told them so to his face, he decided to go into voluntary exile into the island of Skyros, where he was then killed and buried. And so this was the end of one of the most famous kings of Athens. But his name lived on into legend. His story, however, wasn't truly over. The hero, it seemed, was not finished protecting his city. Generations later, at Marathon, the entire future of Athens was at stake. A massive Persian army had landed, ready to burn the city and enslave its people. The vastly outnumbered Athenian soldiers braced for a hopeless battle, a desperate last stand for their homes. But as the two armies crashed together, many of the Athenian soldiers saw something impossible. A phantom, the spectral figure, stormed directly into the Persian ranks, cutting a path for the living to follow. It was Theseus, returned from the grave to defend his city in its most desperate hour. As thanks for having helped his father and the Athenians win the Battle of Marathon with his ghostly interventions, Timon, son of Miltiades, set off for the island of Skyros to go and see if he could recover the bones of Theseus. In the end, Timon managed to find the Theseus remains, so he packed them all up and brought them here to Athens, where they were entombed in the temple you see behind me, which then took the name of Theseion. But in reality, the temple already had a master, Hephaestus, god of the forge. And the true name of the temple you see behind me is not the Theseion, but the Hephaestion. And yet, the name of Theseus persists, as you can see, from the name of the metro station behind me.
Theseo, as in Theseus.